Hello everyone, welcome back to the Midcast, sick edition. I am running a little bit of a cold lately, so if I do sound a little deeper in voice, or a bit nasally, or sniffly, or sickly, or any other descriptor under the sun for sickness, please do forgive me. Today's episode may also be short, maybe only around 20-something minutes, but we'll see. And it is a free-form question. I wanted to change up the format of the episodes, the installments of this podcast. So I will be proposing a question to all of you, and then also giving my view on the question. And I found this question on Twitter. Unfortunately, I don't remember exactly who it was from, nor can I find the original tweet at this point. Although, the question was very interesting because I think a lot of people have very differing opinions on it. This question is, what is one thing in a video game that you find in several video games that you just absolutely despise? Like just one overall thing that, every developer decides, let's put this in, and then everyone hates it. I am curious what you all out there have to say about it. Personally, there's a lot of things I don't like to see in video games, especially these days. There's the very obvious ones, which I have discussed in a decent amount of detail in previous installments, like microtransactions, etc. But that's less of a gameplay mechanic, part of the game. And it's more of a set of cosmetics or set of something that, it doesn't pertain to the core focus of the game. I do think there's a lot of very common mechanics added into games that just are generally disliked, but are almost essential, if you know what I mean, to the core gameplay loop. For example, Minecraft. A lot of people dislike the hunger system, including me. I find it more of a tedious mechanic, although I do understand why it's there. It's to balance out, just doing non-stop activities. It's meant to slow the player down somewhat, because it is already very easy to speedrun the game, even if you're not, a professional speedrunner. Personally, I am not a professional speedrunner, but I could probably finish Minecraft from, spawning into Ender Dragon within 2 hours or so, if I really pushed it. Maybe 3. And I do think that's a bit... it doesn't feel great, you know what I mean? And obviously, Minecraft is one of those sandbox games where you're meant to craft your own adventure and, build your own things and take the amount of time you want to take. But I do feel like, hunger being one of those roadblocks, in a sense, to stop you from just blitzing the game is sort of a healthy thing for the game. Although I do think there are many things they could do better. And I think that applies to a lot of different mechanics in different games, where the mechanic makes sense to exist, but it could definitely be done better. You know what I mean? Another good example of a mechanic that could probably be done better, and I've talked about this in a previous installment, Payday 2. Fantastic game. I've been playing it a lot lately. Christmas event's a lot of fun. But one of the biggest hurdles that I have with it is the duffel bag system, where you are, transporting the money from, the vault to the escape van. And, if you have 3 other friends helping you out with it, it doesn't take that long. It's not that big of an annoyance. But when you're on your own, it's a very tedious, slow, boring, and just overall unfun experience. It does make sense for it to be there. It's, it's the thrill of escaping with your duffel bag full of money, but it's not really thrilling after the 3rd or 4th time, if you know what I mean. Walking at a snail's pace towards the van while soaking up bullets is, not something I consider fun. I definitely think they could do better with this mechanic. I think maybe, if there is 3 other people in your crew, like actual people, having one duffel bag each is fine. But maybe if you're on your own, you can carry more of them, because you do have bots to help you. AI teammates. They're not exactly that intelligent. They are very slow. They are very strange. They walk in the wrong directions. They don't really throw bags by themselves unless you ask them to. And it's, again, a very slow, tedious, and unfun process that could definitely be developed upon. I'm hoping Payday 3 just got announced. I'm hoping they sort that out in Payday 3. I am looking forward to Payday 3, for sure. It's a game I've been looking forward to since I heard about it. There was the small image teasers that came out. But getting back on topic, I think one of my least favorite mechanics that just kind of plagues games, I have seen a lot of people have this view alongside me, is unskippable cutscenes. Like cutscenes that no matter how many times you play the game, no matter how long it is, you have to sit through the entire thing over and over and over and over again. And obviously, the first time, it's fine, because you're getting lore and exposition. The second time, it's a bit of an annoyance, but you're willing to sit through it. Maybe you notice something about the cutscene that you didn't notice before. And the third, fourth, fifth, and beyond times you watch this cutscene, you really wish you could rip your eyeballs out and then skip the cutscene. I don't really understand why they decide not to give players the option to skip a cutscene. It feels like a very fundamental thing to be able to do, as if the game is, especially meant to be replayed over and over again. Why would you have something that's not friendly to replayability? I believe Elden Ring has skippable cutscenes, which is a huge bonus. I was initially worried when I saw that there were cutscenes. I was like, oh boy, is this going to be skippable? Am I going to be stuck here for the next 15 minutes watching a guy monologue? And thankfully, I was proven wrong, and you can skip the cutscenes. Definitely deserves Game of the Year, Elden Ring. It's a fantastic game if you haven't played it. But moving back to things that we don't necessarily like in games, game design choices, I've never been a fan of the incredibly high skill ceiling many multiplayer games have. And that might sound like, just get good, get better, and then you won't have so many problems. Bit of a thing to add to that is many of us have. This is going to sound really rough, but many of us have lives outside of playing video games, multiple hours a day on end, 24/7, like some people do. And when you have other responsibilities, maybe only 1 or 2 days a week to play video games, you're never really going to reach, very high with a, skill ceiling that ridiculously high. And one of my favorite multiplayer games, Team Fortress 2, I would say has a ridiculously high skill ceiling. And a friend and I were talking about this the other day, and it's a game that's been around for 15 years, just about. And because of that, there are some people who've been playing this game, almost every day, or at least off and on for the past 15 years, and have 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 hours in it. Or even if it isn't that many, 5,000 hours is still a ludicrous amount. And these people, they're super good at the game. They're incredibly good at the game. And it's almost to a point, because the game itself doesn't have a very good way of balancing player skill out, because if you have this 10,000 hour player on one team, and then you have someone who wants to try out the game for the first time, like just today or tomorrow or whatever, they only have a couple minutes at best, a very loose understanding of game mechanics at best, and they're just gonna get absolutely ripped to shreds by this guy who's been playing for the past 15 years, and that is. That obviously that there is just a huge skill gap there, right? And that's going to exist in literally anything that you do, like any task, any game, any sport. There's going to be a skill gap, a beginner versus an expert. But when there is let's use soccer as an example, right? Soccer is a very straightforward game with obviously different tactics, but the end goal is always the same, and it isn't entirely reliant on you having to counter like one guy on the other team, right? There are a myriad of things that you could do in the wake of a very skillful player. In a lot of games, that is not the case. A good player in Team Fortress 2 can essentially shut down the entire match, the entire game, and that can be very unfun for many people. I've had a lot of people talk to me about that is the major frustration that they have is they can't really have fun in a game if they aren't really able to play it, because the other people on the other team are just so incomprehensibly better than they are, and the chances of this fresh install getting to that level in any sane or meaningful amount of time is just is not feasible. And I, as someone who does actually have around 5,000 hours in Team Fortress 2 that I've spent better of 9 no, I've been in 2023, so it's been about 10 years for me for playing Team Fortress 2, and I am actually one of those players I would consider pretty decently good, not to not to boost my own ego, but I do think I am pretty decent at the game. Maybe not the best, well, certainly not the best, but enough to see that there are some players when I go up against them that they have a hard time. And I do in some ways feel bad when I have to play against players like that, because I know that it's like, even if I were to hold back, it would be any good player, if they were to hold back against a new player, it still wouldn't matter that much. You'd have to not try at all to, what I mean? You would have to, that skill ceiling and floor is just so different. That's a Mount Everest of skill right there. And some other games like Overwatch. Now, I've had my piece on Overwatch before. It's not a game I'm a fan of, but one thing I can say that they did well, is that because the skill ceiling is significantly lower than the one in Team Fortress 2 is very friendly to new players in that regard. When I say this, I am not talking about anything else Overwatch has. I do not think it is a good game whatsoever. But the skill ceiling issue is really well handled in Overwatch. Now I'll give them that. And we don't really have this issue in cooperative games, obviously, because even if there's one guy carrying, and as long as the game is well designed, you're gonna still have fun, especially if you're playing with a friend who just has a lot more experience. Although there is a game of mine, absolute favorite of mine, Terraria. I've spent a decent amount of time in Terraria, and I would say playing with friends, especially friends who are not familiar with the game, is not a good experience. And I don't say this for, someone who's very experienced with the game. Like, that, it's fine for you because you're just playing the game. The experience is bad for them. Because in Terraria, you can progress so quickly without, your friend who's brand new to the game, without them even knowing what you did. They don't know, what half the bosses are, if any. They don't know what half the items do, what anything does. And, a good player, they can get to mid-game, I'd say, within an hour or two. At best. I've been able to get about mid-game in about 2 hours or so if you really push it, You got people way better than me who can do it in an hour, half an hour. And when you're a friend who's brand new, whose experience should take probably around maybe 10, 15, as of a fresh start, you are expediting their experience very quickly, and it's not very enjoyable for them. I've had this concern also brought up to me through other friends who either don't enjoy the game or had a really hard time getting into it because of that. They had friends who just rushed along so quickly they didn't get a chance to really experience the game in the way it was intended. And is this a gameplay, design problem? Sort of. I would say Terraria, while there is a literal guide NPC whose purpose is to guide you, throughout the game doesn't really tell you that he can do that. And believe it or not, that is a very crucial thing a lot of people miss. Even when I first started playing, I did not talk to the guide NPC, and I would have to go to the wiki and figure things out from there. And when a game makes you go to the wiki, that's a sign that the game might have some design issues, at least in my opinion. And I do think this is actually kind of forming into another thing that I kind of don't like about a lot of games, is if you are forced to go to the wiki page to figure something out, or if something's just too frustrating for you to figure out on your own, there's an obvious problem. Another kind of good example of a game that doesn't explain itself very well, at least in the time that I played it, is Warframe. Warframe is a game that I've played from 2016, 2017 up until recently. I still play it now and again, but nowhere near as much as I used to. It's a very fast-paced, build your own arsenal kind of game, like lots of different niche mechanics, but the problem Warframe has is that it has so many mechanics you have to keep track of in your head, and if you don't know a lot of them, you're gonna have a hard time succeeding, especially later on in the game. And obviously, when something is later on in the game, you should have more experience, but there are just a lot of mechanics that nowhere in the game are they told you how they work. And oftentimes, the majority of my experience comes from watching YouTubers or reading entire articles on the wiki page to learn how damage calculations work against enemies. And I do see this as just a gameplay oversight. The tutorial does a very minute job of explaining these things, how modding your weapons work, how damage resistance works, how armor works, how all these little things work. They just don't do a good job, and it forces you to use the wiki. And that's just a big pet peeve of mine. Because I really just don't think. I think everyone would agree for the most part that having to use a wiki is just not fun, because you have to tab out. You could be in the middle of something in the game, but you just can't figure out what the mission you need to do is, or what the objective, what material you need. So you're just sitting there on a wiki page reading through it okay, you got to put this here and you got to go there. It's okay, great. I had to spoil the experience for myself because the game just won't explain it to me. It's not doing a good job. And I do think this argument can be, kind of disassembled in different ways, and you can be like, oh, well, maybe if you just tried harder, or if you did this or did that, and sure. Maybe there are some situations where if I was less stubborn and decided to, actually really take a look at something, I could figure it out. But there are some, I would say, very good examples where you cannot reasonably believe that someone would go out of their way just to sit in game and try to figure something out on their own without they could just go to the wiki and figure it out in half or a quarter of the time. And one last game I just kind of came to mind. Another game I really love, Sea of Thieves. Again, great game. It does have a fair share of its own issues, I would say, but I think one of the big ones is they have these little fun pirate puzzles that you could do, right? It's like a riddle, and you gotta go find the treasure, very classic pirate stuff. But then it's, the riddles are very vague and sometimes seemingly incorrect, to the point where, the map will say, go southeast to the palm tree on the tip of the island, and you go there. And, you look at your compass, it says southeast, and then you dig under the palm tree and nothing happens. You're like, oh, maybe, I picked the wrong spot. And then you go to the wiki after an hour trying to figure it out. And the spot you were looking for was not on the southeast part of the island. It was on the northwest. And you're probably thinking to yourself, if you've never played the game before, okay, so they're just, are they lying to you? What's going on? No, they're not, because it's so, it makes sense only if you look at it in a very specific light. You have to, go onto the island, look at it, and the palm tree is facing, southeast, and all these other things, but the map doesn't really, the little riddle doesn't tell you that. The riddle doesn't tell you a whole lot at all. That's why it's a riddle. But because these islands could be so big, and everything could be so confusing, you could spend an upward of 20-30 minutes on an island doing nothing except walking around, trying to figure out a riddle. And at some point, you're either going to find it or give up and look at the wiki, or just give up and leave. Which is, I've done all three of those things. And, again, thinking about it, I keep saying this, I keep thinking about it more and more. This is actually a really good, thing I've just thought of, is how many games actually have this problem. Because, at least back in the day, Minecraft had this issue. Nowadays, it's not so much of a problem, but there are some mechanics in Minecraft that many of us don't even think about nowadays. For example, the Nether portal. A portal to get to the Nether dimension and, go progress through the rest of the game, is that, the Nether portal's never explicitly explained to the player. For example, you grab someone off the street and sit in front of a computer to play Minecraft. They could spend 100 hours in the game. 100 hours. And there's a decently large chance that they have never built a Nether portal. And they didn't even know that there was an end dimension, or an ender dragon, or a wither. They probably didn't know any of that, because the portal is just never explained to the player, which is it's a huge part of the game. It's an entirely separate dimension from the overworld. You'd think that the game would be hey, this is an important aspect of the game that you are eventually going to have to do if you want to complete the game. So this is how you do it. But no, it does not explain it to you. In fact, a lot of these things are just not explained. Or even finding the end portal. If you get to the Nether, once you're there, again, it doesn't explain what you have to do in there. You're just in there now. They don't tell you need to go kill blazes. You need to go get endermen. You need to get ender pearls. You need to craft them into this. And, yes, that does kind of play into the whole adventure and find it out yourself whole like ordeal. But that's it feels just weird. There's not even like a much of a hint. Like the only hint you get that there was a second dimension out there is the ruined nether portals you could find around the world that spawn naturally. The ones that are all destroyed and crumbled, and I kind of leave a hint that there might have been one, but it doesn't tell you, hey, you need to use completely, pure obsidian. You can't use crying obsidian. You need to use pure obsidian, and then you need to use a flint and steel to light the portal. It doesn't tell you much of that at all. And I do think that's kind of a detriment to the gameplay overall. It could definitely be improved on. But I would say the rest of the game, especially nowadays with the recipe book and stuff, it explains itself enough, right? Like, you get the general gist of the game just by it telling you, hey, punch a tree, get the logs. After that, if you've used you or even heard of Legos before, you're gonna know what you're gonna do, right? You build, you break stuff. That's the general gist of the game. And from there, you can figure out the majority of the game's mechanics, like fighting. If you'll probably find redstone eventually, you'll probably try to mess around with it. You probably won't understand it very in depth, but hey, you'll get somewhere. With the recipe book, it'll probably tell you how to make pistons. That thing's always been finicky for me, but it'll probably get you somewhere, I would imagine. But yeah, the nether portal specifically, just not explained. Unless they changed it super recently, right? Like, the past couple months, and without my knowledge, they just like, hey, here's a tutorial. This is how you do it. Like, otherwise, I'm just not aware of anything that would kind of help this mechanic. But besides all that, I would say that I don't really have any more irks that, bother me in different games, commonalities. So, I think I will end this installment here. Please do excuse the occasional sniffle, sneeze, and or cough that you may have heard in this episode. But again, I do have a bit of a cold. I am recovering. And hopefully the next one won't be so sickly. I am definitely trying to mix up the formats now and again. I hope this one was as enjoyable as the others. If enjoyable at all. But thank you for watching. This has been your host, Mid. Have a good night.